My son packed his bags on his 19th birthday and moved across the country to live with his father, the same man who left us when my boy was just 6 years old. For 13 long years, I raised him completely alone. I thought we had an unbreakable bond. I thought nothing could come between us. But I was wrong. One day, he told me he didn't want to talk to me anymore. He cut me off completely like I was some stranger on the street. But what happened when he desperately asked me for $15,000 was something no one saw coming. The phone call that followed changed everything forever. I'm going to tell you the whole story, every painful detail, because what happened next will shock you. But first, thank you all for being part of our Granny's Voice family. Your support means everything to me, and I read every single comment you leave. If you love these real, raw stories about life's hardest moments, please hit that subscribe button right now. It helps me keep sharing these stories that matter. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I absolutely love hearing from viewers all around the world. Today's special shout-out goes to Maria from Chicago, who wrote such a beautiful comment last week. Thank you for watching and for sharing your own story, Maria. Now let's get into this story that completely changed my life forever. Get comfortable because this one is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster you won't forget. I still remember that terrible morning like it happened yesterday. The smell of pancakes filling our small kitchen, my 6-year-old son sitting at our wooden table with his favorite blue bowl, his little legs swinging back and forth the way children do when they're happy and carefree. He was humming some song he'd learned at school, maple syrup sticky on his chin, completely innocent to what was about to happen. That's when his father walked into the kitchen carrying 2 big black suitcases. I knew immediately something was terribly wrong. The look on his face was cold, distant, like he was already somewhere else in his mind. My son looked up with those big brown eyes that sparkled with joy whenever his daddy came home. "Are we going on a trip, Daddy?" he asked excitedly. But his father didn't answer him. Instead, he looked right at me and said the words that would haunt me forever. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving." Just like that. No warning, no discussion, no chance to fight for our family. My son's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth, syrup dripping back into the bowl. He looked confused, scared, like he could sense the world was about to fall apart but didn't understand why. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. All I could think about was my little boy sitting there, still in his dinosaur pajamas, about to watch his daddy walk out of his life. "What do you mean you're leaving?" I whispered, hoping my son wouldn't hear the panic in my voice. But his father was already heading for the door, those suitcases bumping against his legs. "I never wanted this life," he said without even turning around. "I'm too young to be tied down with a kid and responsibilities." The front door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through our house like thunder. My little boy dropped his spoon and it clattered against the bowl, so loud in the sudden silence. "Is Daddy coming back for dinner?" he asked, his voice small and worried. I knelt down beside his chair, my hands shaking as I smoothed his messy hair, trying to hold myself together for his sake. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes, and I knew this moment would stay with him forever. "It's just you and me now, sweetheart," I whispered, pulling him close and breathing in that sweet smell of childhood maple syrup and innocence and trust. That night, after I tucked him into bed and answered 100 questions about where Daddy went, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried until I had no tears left. I was 24 years old with no college degree, working part-time at a small diner, and suddenly I was a single mother with rent to pay and a child to raise. I had exactly $247 in my checking account and a refrigerator that was mostly empty. I had no idea how I was going to survive, let alone give my son the life he deserved. But as I sat there on that cold tile floor, I made myself a promise. I would be everything he needed. I would work as many jobs as it took. I would never let him feel abandoned again. I would love him enough for 2 parents. And that's exactly what I did. Raising him by myself was the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life, and I've done some really hard things. I worked at Martha's Diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, serving coffee and scrambled eggs to truckers and construction workers who left small tips. Then I'd race home, help my son with his homework, make him dinner, and after he went to bed, I'd drive across town to clean offices until midnight. Some nights I was so tired I'd fall asleep standing up while mopping floors. My back ached constantly. My hands were always red and raw from cleaning chemicals, and I lived on coffee and whatever leftover food I could bring home from the diner. But I was there for everything that mattered. Every scraped knee that needed kissing better, every nightmare that needed a mother's comfort, every first day of school photo, every parent-teacher conference where I sat alone while other couples discussed their children together. I taught him how to ride his bike in our tiny backyard, running alongside him with my hand on his back until he was brave enough to let me let go. I taught him how to tie his shoes using the bunny ears method, practicing over and over until his little fingers could manage the loops. When he was scared of the dark, I'd sit by his bed singing old lullabies my grandmother used to sing to me, sometimes falling asleep in that uncomfortable chair and waking up with a crick in my neck. When he got sick with the flu one winter, I stayed up all night checking his fever every hour, placing cool washcloths on his forehead and feeding him ice chips when he couldn't keep anything else down. I called in sick to both my jobs for 3 days, losing money I desperately needed, but my boy needed his mama more than I needed those paychecks. I held his head while he threw up, cleaned up mess after mess without complaining, and told him stories to distract him from feeling awful. When his fever finally broke on the 3rd night, he looked up at me with those trusting brown eyes and whispered, "Thank you for taking care of me, Mama." That moment made all the sleepless nights, all the worry, all the exhaustion worth it. He was my whole world, and I shaped every single decision around what was best for him. When my boss at the diner offered me a promotion to assistant manager that would mean working weekends, I turned it down because I didn't want to miss his Saturday morning soccer games. When a man I liked asked me on a date, I said no because my son had a school play that night and I'd promised to be in the front row cheering him on. My life became completely about him, his needs, his happiness, his future. I didn't mind the sacrifice. In fact, I loved it. Being his mother was the most important job I'd ever had, and I was determined to do it right. He loved bedtime stories more than anything else in the world. Every single night, we'd curl up together in his little bed with whatever book he'd chosen that day. Sometimes it was the same story 5 nights in a row because he wanted to hear about the brave knight or the magic dragon again and again. I'd do different voices for all the characters, making him giggle until he'd beg me to, "Do the funny voice again, Mama." After the story, I'd tuck his blankets up to his chin, kiss his forehead, and whisper sweet dreams, my precious boy. Then I'd sit in the hallway outside his door, just listening to him breathe, making sure he was safe and sound, praying every night that I was doing enough, that I was enough for him. Sunday mornings were our special time together. I'd make pancakes from scratch, the real kind, not from a box, and we'd eat them while still in our pajamas, syrup dripping everywhere, talking about everything and nothing. He'd tell me about his dreams from the night before, usually involving dinosaurs or spaceships or becoming a superhero who could fly. I'd tell him about my dreams too. Simple dreams about him growing up happy and safe and knowing how much his mama loved him. Those Sunday morning talks were some of the most precious moments of my life. Just me and my boy, no distractions, no worries about money or work or the future. Just pure love and pancakes and laughter. But as he grew older, things started to change in ways I didn't expect. The teenage years brought a distance I wasn't prepared for. It started small. He'd roll his eyes when I asked about his day, or give me one-word answers instead of the long, detailed stories he used to tell. I told myself it was normal, that all teenagers pull away from their parents a little bit. But then he started asking more questions about his father. Why doesn't Dad ever call me? Why did he really leave? What was he like when you first met him? I always tried to answer honestly but gently, never saying anything bad about his father even though my heart was still broken from the abandonment. The questions became more frequent as he got older. He'd compare our modest lifestyle to what he imagined his father's life might be like. "I bet Dad lives in a big house," he'd say. "I bet he has a nice car and doesn't have to worry about money like we do." Those comments stung more than he knew. I worked so hard to provide for us, but there was only so much a single mother with 2 jobs could do. We lived in a small rented house with creaky floors and a leaky bathroom faucet I couldn't afford to fix. My car was old and made strange noises, but it got us where we needed to go. We shopped at thrift stores and used coupons for groceries, and sometimes I'd lie awake at night worrying about how I'd pay all the bills. When he turned 16, he came to me with a request that made my stomach drop. "Mom, I want to visit Dad this summer." I found him on social media and we've been talking. He lives in California now, and he wants me to come see him. My first instinct was to say absolutely not. The man who walked out on us when times got tough suddenly wanted to play daddy again. But when I looked at my son's hopeful face, I couldn't bring myself to crush his dreams. Maybe it would be good for him to get some answers. Maybe he'd see his father for who he really was and come back grateful for what we had together. So I said yes, even though it scared me to death. That summer felt like the longest 3 months of my life. I missed him terribly, but I tried to be supportive when he called to tell me about all the exciting things he was doing with his father. Fancy restaurants, expensive shopping trips, visits to theme parks I could never afford to take him to. His father had apparently done well for himself over the years. He owned some kind of business and lived in a big house with a swimming pool. Everything I couldn't give my son, his father was showering him with during this visit. I should have been happy that he was having fun, but instead I felt inadequate, like all my years of love and sacrifice couldn't compete with money and flashy experiences. When he came home at the end of the summer, something had changed. He seemed different, older somehow, but also restless and unsatisfied with our quiet life. He'd gotten used to expensive things and exciting adventures, and our simple dinners and movie nights at home felt boring to him now. He started talking about his father more often, sharing stories about their time together, comparing everything in our life to what his father could provide. "Dad has a huge TV in every room," he'd say, or, "Dad took me to this amazing steakhouse that cost more than we spend on groceries in a month." Each comment felt like a tiny knife to my heart. The phone calls between my son and his father became a regular thing after that visit. They'd talk for hours, sometimes late into the night. I'd hear him laughing and chatting in his room, sounding happier and more animated than he ever did when talking to me anymore. His father was telling him stories about his successful business, his nice car, his big house, painting a picture of a life full of possibilities that I simply couldn't offer. I started to feel like I was losing my son to a man who had contributed nothing to his upbringing, but was now swooping in to claim credit for the wonderful young man I had raised. By the time my son turned 17, the visits to California had become a regular summer tradition. Each time he came back, he seemed a little more distant from me and a little more enamored with his father's lifestyle. He started talking about maybe going to college in California, about all the opportunities waiting for him there. I supported his dreams, of course, but my heart was breaking at the thought of him moving so far away. I had spent 17 years being the center of his world, and now I could feel myself being pushed to the edges of his life. His father was becoming the hero, and I was just the woman who had raised him. Then came the conversation that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in March, just after his 19th birthday. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten breakfast the morning his father left us 13 years earlier. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his hands the way he used to do as a little boy when he was in trouble. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said, not meeting my eyes. My heart started pounding because I could hear the seriousness in his voice. "I've been thinking a lot about my future, and I've made a decision." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm going to move to California to live with Dad." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Move to California," I repeated, hoping I had misunderstood. "But what about college here? What about your job at the hardware store? What about—" I stopped myself before I said, "What about me?" because I didn't want to make this about my feelings. He finally looked up at me, and I could see he felt guilty but also determined. "I want to get to know Dad better, Mom. He's offered me a job at his company, and he says he can help me get into a good college out there. It's a great opportunity." The way he said it made it sound like staying with me would be holding him back from his dreams. "Is this really what you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was shattering into pieces. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think it's time. I'm 19 now. I need to start building my own life." Building his own life. As if the life we had together wasn't real or valuable. As if the 13 years I had devoted to raising him were just a stepping stone to something better. I wanted to argue, to remind him of all the times I had been there when his father wasn't, to list all the sacrifices I had made for him. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded and said, "Okay. If that's what you really want, then I'll support you." The next few weeks were a blur of packing and preparations. I helped him sort through his belongings, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Felt like dismantling our entire life together, box by box. I folded the clothes I had bought him, packed the books we used to read together, wrapped the trophies he had won in sports I had driven him to every week for years. Each item was a memory, and with every box we filled, I felt like I was losing another piece of my heart. He was excited about his new adventure, talking constantly about his plans and all the things he wanted to do in California. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out how to live in a house that would soon feel empty without him. The night before he left, I couldn't sleep. I walked past his room and saw him lying awake too, staring at the ceiling. I knocked softly on his door frame. "Can't sleep either." "Yes." He turned to look at me, and for a moment, he looked like my little boy again. "I'm nervous," he admitted. "What if it's different living with Dad full-time? What if we don't get along?" I sat down on the edge of his bed, the same bed where I had read him thousands of bedtime stories. "Then you call me," I said. "No matter what happens, no matter how things go, you call me and I'll figure out a way to help you. You're my son, and that will never change." The morning he left was one of the hardest days of my life. I drove him to the airport and we sat in the car for a few extra minutes before he had to go inside. "I'm going to miss you, Mom," he said, and I could hear emotion in his voice. "I'm going to miss you too, sweetheart," I replied. "More than you can possibly imagine." We hugged in that airport parking lot, and I held on for just a second too long, trying to memorize the feeling of my son in my arms. "Call me when you land," I said. "I want to know you got there safely." He promised he would, grabbed his bags, and walked into the airport without looking back. I sat in that parking lot and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. The first few weeks after he left were terrible. The house felt enormous and silent without him. I'd catch myself cooking dinner for 2 people, then remember it was just me now. I'd hear a sound and think it was him coming home, only to realize it was just the house settling. I kept his room exactly the way he left it, with his old posters on the walls and his childhood stuffed animals still sitting on the shelf. Sometimes I'd sit in there just to feel close to him. But he did call regularly at first, telling me about his new job, his father's house, the friends he was making. He sounded happy, which should have made me happy too, but mostly it just made me feel forgotten. As the months passed, the phone calls became less frequent. When we did talk, our conversations felt stilted and awkward, like we were distant relatives catching up rather than mother and son. He'd tell me the basic facts about his life. Work was good, he liked California, he was thinking about taking some college classes, but none of the personal details he used to share with me. I'd ask about his feelings, about whether he was lonely or homesick, but he'd brush off those questions with, "I'm fine, Mom," or "Everything's great here." It felt like he was becoming a stranger, and I didn't know how to bridge the growing gap between us. Then came the phone calls that I started making too often. I just missed him so much, and I wanted to stay connected to his life even though he was thousands of miles away. I'd call to ask about his day, to tell him about something funny that happened at the diner, to share neighborhood gossip he used to enjoy hearing about. But I could sense his growing impatience with my calls. His responses became shorter and less enthusiastic. Sometimes he wouldn't answer at all, and when he'd call me back hours later, he'd say he was busy with work or friends. I was becoming a burden to him, an obligation rather than someone he wanted to talk to. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening in October. I had called him 3 times that week already, But I had just gotten some news about our neighbor's dog having puppies, and I knew he would want to hear about it because he had always loved that dog. When he answered the phone, I could tell immediately that he was annoyed. "Hi, sweetheart," I said cheerfully, trying to ignore his tone. "I have some cute news about Mrs. Henderson's dog Rosie." But he cut me off before I could finish. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, and my stomach dropped at the serious tone in his voice. "This has to stop." "What has to stop?" I asked, though I had a terrible feeling I already knew. "The constant calling," he said bluntly. "It's too much. I'm trying to build a new life here, and I need space. I need to focus on my job and my relationship with Dad without feeling guilty every time I don't answer your call." Each word felt like a slap across my face. "I just want to stay connected with you," I said weakly. "I know, but it feels like you're trying to control my life from across the country. Dad says it's not healthy, this attachment you have to me." Ed says. Those two words told me everything I needed to know about who was influencing this decision. "I'm not trying to control you," I said, my voice starting to shake with hurt and anger. "I'm trying to maintain a relationship with my son. I raised you for 19 years, and now I'm supposed to just disappear from your life." There was a long pause before he answered. "You're not disappearing, or just taking a break. I need time to figure out who I am without you always checking on me." Taking a break from his mother, as if I was some girlfriend he needed space from, not the woman who had sacrificed everything for him since the day he was born. "How long is this break supposed to last?" "Yes. I don't know," he said. "I just need you to stop calling me for a while." After that devastating conversation, I didn't call him. I respected his wishes, even though it was killing me inside. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. I'd pick up my phone 100 times a day, wanting to hear his voice, wanting to know if he was eating well or sleeping enough or if he ever missed me. But I didn't call. I gave him the space he demanded, even though it felt like I was cutting off my own arm. The silence was deafening. I started working extra shifts at the diner just to keep busy, to stop myself from thinking about how quiet the house was without him. I'd come home exhausted, collapse into bed, and try not to think about the son who no longer wanted to hear from me. 3 long, painful years passed like this. 3 years of silence, of wondering how he was doing, of seeing mothers with their adult sons and feeling a stab of jealousy and loss. I learned about his life through social media posts from mutual friends, tiny glimpses into a world I was no longer part of. Photos of him at office parties, vacation trips with his father, casual moments that should have included me but didn't. He looked happy and successful, which should have made me proud, but mostly it just reminded me that he had built a life that didn't need me in it. I stopped checking those posts after a while because they hurt too much. Then came the phone call that changed everything. But that's where this story takes an unexpected turn, and you'll have to wait to hear what happened next. If you've ever poured your heart into someone only to be pushed away, you understand this pain. If you've ever had to choose between holding on and letting go, you know how hard it is. Drop a comment and tell me what you think I should have done differently. And don't forget to subscribe to Granny's Voice for more real stories about love, loss, and the complicated relationships that shape our lives. See you next time.